History is not only what is written, it is also what remains nameless, what is forgotten, buried, erased because it did not fit into the next era, sometimes deliberately, sometimes simply because there was no one else to remember. We were taught that we know where we came from, that we can trace the path, from stone to city, from symbol to writing, from tribe to empire. And much of this is true. But along the way, there are cities left behind that we don't know who owned them. There are 25 stories in these 3 hours. They don't require faith, only attention. Maybe you'll fall asleep while they're playing. Maybe the opposite. Maybe you'll feel like someone was already here, before you, and left, leaving not an answer, but a trace. A pyramid hidden under the ice. In eastern Antarctica, beyond the Prince Charles Ridge, lies an area rarely explored by researchers. There are no stations, no logistics points, only ice and constant wind. But it was in this area, on a satellite image from 2012, that one object caught our attention. It hadn't been noted before, not on maps from the British expeditions, nor in the databases of scientific missions. And yet, there it was, in a photograph taken on a clear day, at an angle that cast a clear shadow. The object's shape resembled a pyramid, not in a symbolic sense, in a geometric one. Smooth slopes, equal sides, a precise angle between the planes. The height, according to calculations from the shadow, is about 140 meters. The base is almost square. Everything is too perfect not to be recorded, and too unexpected to explain. The initial reaction was that it was a filming error, a satellite artifact, layer overlap, or light angle, but repeated images taken from other satellites in other seasons showed the same shape. Then another hypothesis emerged. Hidden beneath the ice is a rock peak, worn smooth by time, snow, and erosion. This is possible. Antarctica's landscape is full of irregularities. But there is one peculiarity. There is nothing near this object. Typically, glacial mountain forms form in groups. Rise of relief, ridges, faults. Here is a solitary form, isolated, as if placed, as if having a meaning. Not geological, but something else. Access to the area is impossible by land. Traveling across the ice requires approval, permission, and enormous expense. There have been no scientific missions to the area, only satellite observations. They continued for 5 years. The shape of the object has not changed. The slopes retain their geometry. The snow is blown away by the wind. The ice is not accumulating at the usual rate. This raises a separate question. Why is the object almost clean? One theory suggests the presence of a warm anomaly beneath the surface. This could be a subglacial heat source, a geothermal vent, a rare heat transfer zone. Possibly, but no traces of such processes have been recorded nearby. No fracture, no evaporation, only pure ice and a regular shape. Analysis of geodetic maps showed that the object is located almost exactly on one of the old measurement lines used in ancient times, the so-called geodynamic orientations. They linked buildings in Egypt, Mesoamerica, and some parts of Asia. This is speculation, but the coincidence has been documented. Several research groups not affiliated with academic structures have suggested that the shape is unnatural, that it is not geology, that it is a structure hidden under the ice. A pyramid, not symbolic, but literal. A construction, made long before the ice cover, long before history. From a scientific perspective, this is impossible. There are no traces of ancient civilizations in Antarctica. No pottery fragments, no organic remains, no traces of life. The region's climate became hostile long ago. According to official data, more than 1 million years ago. But then the question remains, how to explain single symmetry? Some point to other examples. In Bosnia, for example, the so-called Pyramid of the Sun was also written off as a natural hill until exploration began. In Greenland, there are formations that repeat the triangular shape. But everywhere there is a group, a bundle, a relief. Here there is one, perfect, as if standing alone, as if in its place. There's no evidence that this is a man-made structure, and no evidence that it's simply an ice peak. Only a shape, only a shadow, only coordinates that, again and again, return a geometry that isn't characteristic of random terrain. Maybe it's an optical illusion. Maybe it's just ice. But maybe it's something that was left when everything else went under. Something that doesn't fit in with the rest of the geology, because it doesn't belong. We don't know what's beneath the surface. We don't know who has been there, if anyone has been there. We only know that on a white, smooth, uninhabited plateau, there stands a shape, which we call a pyramid, because it resembles nothing else. An empire that burned before it had a name. The Karakum Desert, in what is now Turkmenistan. Traces of a large settlement were discovered more than a century ago. At the time, it attracted little attention. The site was poorly accessible. Sand obscured most of the foundations, and the climate was hostile. Archaeologists attributed the find to one of the many transit points along ancient trade routes. Nothing more. But in the 1960s, everything changed. An expedition led by Soviet archaeologist Viktor Sarianidi began full-scale excavations in the Gonur Tepe area, and layer after layer they began to uncover not a station, not a campsite, but a center. The remains of a palace were found. Multi-level walls, temples, a canal system, metalworking, grain storage facilities, tools, pottery hoards, sacrificial sites. None of this was temporary. It was a complex, stable structure, a kind of city-state, formed according to all the hallmarks of civilization. The central part is the Acropolis, protected, with regulated access. The layout is regular, that is not chaotic, as in post-nomadic settlements, but calculated. This is no longer just a sedentary lifestyle. This is order. Later, tombs began to be discovered. Stone sarcophagi, vessels with ashes, jewelry made of lapis lazuli, turquoise, and silver. Everything points to a stable social structure, castes, specialization, distribution of power, and all this several centuries earlier than the beginning of the known history of the region. But the main question is not what they found, but what they didn't find. This city had no name, no tablets, no inscriptions, no chronologies, no mentions in the annals of neighboring civilizations, not in Sumerian sources, not in Persian chronicles, not in the archives of India or China. Complete emptiness. And yet, it was a state. It existed. More than 30,000 square meters of fortifications, more than 1,000 burials, traces of export and import, trademarks, traces of fire, traces of restoration after the fire, but not a single written sign by which its name could be recorded. Later, hypotheses began to appear. Some researchers began to call this phenomenon a country without a voice. It built, it ritualized, it buried, it kept records, but it did not speak. Others, on the contrary, suggest that the voice was there, but erased, destroyed, perhaps as a result of destruction, perhaps intentionally, perhaps by the system itself. Another feature, when the system began to collapse, it happened quickly. In the layers you can see fire, abandoned objects, half-ruined buildings. After that, silence, sand, no signs of restoration, no signs of return, as if everything that was here was not meant to continue. Sarianidi called this complex the Margiana civilization. The name is arbitrary. We came up with it. The people who lived there didn't call themselves that. We don't know what they called themselves, because all that remains is the shape, just the lines of the walls, fireplaces, the outlines of grain storage facilities, and not a single name. This is not the only such case. History is full of nameless civilizations, but almost all of them are brief, fragmentary. But here, stability, scale, architecture in which knowledge is visible, and disappearance, without transition, without merging, without mention in those who came after. Perhaps it was a society that didn't need writing. Perhaps it was a culture that lived by oral transmission. Or perhaps they didn't have time to invent it. Or perhaps they deliberately avoided it. But then the question arises, how did an organization of this level arise without fixed accounting systems, without a language that remains? Or was it there, but in a different form? Symbolic? Spatial? Auditory? Now all that remains of this empire are the smooth outlines of the walls, the shadows of the columns, and the dry wind that blows the sand from the paved slabs. And there's a feeling that you're standing not before ruins, but before the outline of a memory that no one has preserved. A car that doesn't fit into the chronology? In 1900, a group of Greek divers searching for sponges in the Aegean Sea stumbled upon a shipwreck off Antikythera Island. Lying at a depth of about 40 meters, it immediately attracted attention. Among the amphoras and statues typical of ancient merchant ships, they found a fragment that, at first glance, had no relation to the other finds. It was a piece of bronze, irregular, covered in deposits, with barely noticeable jagged edges. It was attributed to a decorative element, but later, upon repeated cleaning and examination, it was discovered that it was part of a mechanism. The fragment was later named the Antikythera mechanism. It consisted of gears, cogwheels, axles, and dials. Everything was assembled into a single system designed for complex movement. Even the first models showed that it was an analog computing device. Inside were 37 bronze gears capable of synchronizedly displaying the movement of celestial bodies, solar and lunar cycles, eclipses, and even astronomical phases. It was originally dated to the 1st century BC. This dating remains the same today, but the problem lies elsewhere. The time period to which the find belongs does not suggest the existence of such devices. There is no evidence of such mechanisms among either the Greeks or the Romans. Not in literature, not in engineering treatises, not in temples, not in craft workshops. The mechanism operates on a differential principle, allowing the motion of bodies to be calculated based on their speed and position. This principle is considered a 16th century invention. The development of gear transmissions with such precision came even later. The gears have teeth cut to precise curved geometry. This requires not just knowledge, but tools, templates, metalworking at a level unavailable at the time. But the mechanism was assembled, not theoretically, not schematically, but literally. It existed. It worked. Reconstructions made in the 21st century showed that the device was placed in a box that could be opened. Inside was a handle that, by turning it, could track the position of the sun, moon, and stars. There were also inscriptions, instructions, written in Greek script. This is not a fake. This is not an alien object. This is a man-made object. But how? Why has nothing similar been found, either before or after? Alternative theories suggest that the mechanism is a unique artifact, preserved from an earlier now lost engineering tradition. Perhaps it's a copy. Perhaps it's a reconstruction from someone else's descriptions. But then, another question arises. Why isn't there even a hint of it anywhere else? The author's identity is unknown. No signatures, no names. Only calculations, diagrams, and engravings. As if the creator didn't demand recognition. Or perhaps they created it to order. Some assume the mechanism was ritualistic, that its precision was a side effect of aesthetics. But an analysis of the mechanics shows that precision was a necessity. Every gear is in its place. Every gear is calculated. It is function, not form. Perhaps this device was part of an educational system, a demonstration of cosmic order. But if so, why such a level of complexity? Why not a wooden model, but an engineering instrument comparable in complexity to a Renaissance clock? Perhaps it was an artifact passed down from an earlier period. Or perhaps it was a random technological advancement that arose locally and disappeared along with those who created it. After the ship sank, the device ended up underwater in perfect preservation conditions. It was saved by chance. Without it, we wouldn't have known about its existence. And this raises another question. How many more such devices were there, but didn't survive? Today, the mechanism is kept in the National Archaeological Museum of Athens. It has been studied, scanned, and reproduced, but even the most accurate reconstructions cannot explain its context. It doesn't fit, not as a technology, not as an idea, not as a necessity. This is a machine that shouldn't have existed, but it does. And all that remains of it is not theory, but metal, and a rotating wheel, made by hand, without a name, without descendants. A tomb that could not be opened, but which screamed when touched. In 1977, a team of archaeologists from the Italian Institute of Oriental Research arrived at an excavation site in the Al Ule Valley in northwestern Saudi Arabia. This area is known as part of the ancient Nabatean route and contains dozens of tombs, temples, and rock-cut niches, many of which remain unexplored. Most of the objects in this area date to the 1st century BCE. They are well documented and generally categorizable. But one object, designated Tomb 32K, raised questions from the outset. It was located above the main rock mass, on a ledge where there were no other structures. There were no stairs leading up to it. The entrance to the tomb was rectangular, cut into the stone wall. There were no symbols or inscriptions around it, only a smooth surface and a shadow obscuring the opening. When the team tried to enter, they found the door wouldn't open. The stone wasn't sealed or locked. It simply wouldn't budge. No cracks, no mechanical locks. The door seemed to be part of a single rock, though visually, it stood out in outline. After several unsuccessful attempts to break in, it was decided to conduct an acoustic diagnosis. When the device touched the door surface, an effect occurred that would later be described as a single acoustic emission. Not a sound, not a crack, and a vibrational resonance, brief and focused. Everyone nearby heard it. Not like an echo, not like a tremor, like a sound that didn't come from the object but passed through it. Analysis of the recordings revealed that the signal's frequency was unstable. It began as infrasound, transitioned into the audible range, and then abruptly disappeared. Its duration was less than 1 second. The source was not detected. After that, the door remained in place. It did not collapse. It did not change. But no one tried to open it anymore. A year later, as part of an expansion of the excavations, they returned to the site. The surface of the opening remained untouched. But now, nearby, 3 meters away, a crack had formed in the rock. No traces of an impact. No crumbling. Simply a line extending deep into the massif. Inside, it was a void. Acoustic scanning revealed a cavity beyond. The attempt to reach the cavity was unsuccessful. The instruments stopped working, the electronics went out, the lights dimmed. The only thing that remained was the sensation of pressure. It was as if the air had become denser. Neither the instruments nor the recordings recorded any threat. But subjectively, all the participants described anxiety, difficulty breathing, a strange awareness that something was inside, without form, without movement, but with presence. There were no more sounds, only the same recording made on the first day. Analysis revealed that the sound wave structure contained unusual overtones. It was not repeated in any known sample. But there is a coincidence, a partial similarity with the acoustic effects that occur in stone chambers with a certain volumetric proportion. This means that the tomb may be designed as a resonator. If this is so, then the sound that arose upon touching is not a coincidence. This is the answer. The locals do not talk about the tomb. It is not included in the traditional routes. They do not talk about it. Not in legends, not in retellings. It is simply a place that people do not go. Not because it is forbidden, but because there is nothing there. But the door exists. The shape is correct. The height is a little over 2 meters. The width is standard. Everything suggests that there is a chamber behind it, but it cannot be opened. In any way. Not mechanically. Not by destruction. Not bypassing. Archaeologists have abandoned their efforts. The object has been identified. Research has been suspended. The reports listed as impenetrable, no access. Recommendation: do not touch. Skeptics consider it a coincidence, a geological feature, a rock that has taken the shape of an opening. Possibly. But then where does the sound wave come from? If it's not a door, then why the form? If it's not a tomb, then why the platform? If it's not a chamber, then why the vibration? Sometimes things don't open not because they're locked, but because they don't want to be opened. And maybe what sounded then wasn't a voice, but a warning, a stone that captured heavenly thunder. In the northern part of Bolivia, near Lake Titicaca, archaeologists in 1982 explored the area where the fortifications of the ancient city of Tiwanaku once stood. This region is considered the center of a civilization that existed long before the Incas. Most of the buildings are destroyed. Only platforms, fragments of walls, and leveled areas remain, in places lined with slabs polished by time. One such site was located on the edge of the main complex. It was a leveled plateau of gray andesite, a difficult-to-work stone. One of the slabs was distinctive, measuring approximately 3 meters in length. The surface was smooth, but with a barely noticeable structure resembling a grid. No one could explain its purpose. It contained no inscriptions, only a grid relief, clear angles, intersecting lines, uniform indentations. The study showed that the grid structure followed the celestial sphere. The corners corresponded to the positions of major stars and constellations, but one of the fields was out of place. Where empty cells should have been, there were concentric lines, almost like sound waves. The center is a point. Arcs radiate from it. 5, in a uniform radius. The locals said this place was called the stone that heard thunder. Not lightning, not an earthquake, but the sky. Their language has a word for the unexpected breath of thunder from above. No wind, no rain, just sound. There are no official records of such an event. However, a brief mention was found in the archives of 17th century missionaries that in the year 17 from the Catholic entrance, the sky over Tiwanaku thundered without clouds. People hid under the walls, but the earth did not tremble. The date is not precisely determined, but confirmation exists. When an acoustic study was conducted on the stone, it was found that at a certain frequency it produces sound, not in the sense of playing. Rather, it resonates, creating a vibration that is detected by instruments as infrasound. Not loud, not constant, but discernible. The relief shape amplifies sound when a source, even a weak one, is brought close to its center. Whistle, whisper, air. Everything becomes directional and begins to vibrate the plane. This is impossible on a random surface, only if it is designed as a resonant matrix. According to legend, the stone was carved in memory of an event, not as a tombstone, but as a record of a phenomenon. Not an image, not a myth, but a mechanical attempt to recreate the moment. What exactly a rupture in the heavens is still unclear. Such phenomena are recorded in different parts of the earth, sometimes as a dull explosion, sometimes as a growing howl, always without a source. No earthquake, no sound barrier, no atmospheric disturbances. In the case of Tiwanaku, if it happened, it was an ancient event, hundreds of years before the first scientific measurements. But the memory remained in folklore, and perhaps in stone. What's also strange is that at the moment of sound resonance, a weak electrical oscillation begins across the plane of the stone. Instruments record a voltage of about 0.3–0.5 volts, not enough to activate the equipment, but enough to understand. The stone is reacting, not just with sound, but physically. This phenomenon is possible in crystalline rocks if they have been subjected to shock loading. Perhaps the stone has recorded the effect of sound pressure in its structure, and now, when it is given a signal, it reproduces the vibration pattern. This is not music. This is not text. This is a form of memory left in the material, without letters, without an image, only a trace of vibration, frozen in stone. The object is officially classified as an engineered anomalous stone, meaning it's unknown but must be preserved. Experimentation with it is restricted. Tourists are not allowed there. The site is marked on the map, but not advertised. Maybe it's just geometry, just chance. Or maybe it's a way to record what can't be told. Thunder that no one saw, but which the stone remembered. A tower soaring by design. In southern Iran, in the Zagros Mountains, near the ancient city of Bishapur, there are ruins designated in archaeological records as Site R12. They are not included in the main routes. There's no road leading to them, only a path worn by cattle and shepherds. Locals call this place where no shadow falls. In 1968, a French expedition arrived here. The initial goal was remapping, but among the rocks and crumbling walls, they discovered a platform. It was almost a perfect circle, laid out with flat slabs with a raised edge. In the center is the base of the tower, a stone ring about 4 meters in diameter. There are no traces of anything tall standing here. No supports, no fragments of upper levels. But that's not the strangest thing. Further study revealed that the stones forming the circle possess a magnetic field. It's weak but stable. The compass behaves unnaturally. The needle doesn't point north, but rotates slowly, stopping only in the center of the structure. This effect is not natural. The rock is basalt, a common volcanic stone that is not prone to magnetization. A year later, a repeat geophysical survey was conducted at the same location. A microscopic decrease in gravitational pressure was recorded at a level of 1 meter above the central point. The measurement is not stable. It does not repeat with each measurement. However, several times, values below the norm by fractions of a percent have been recorded. For a scientific report, this deviation is insignificant, but its existence is a fact. Later, in the diaries of one of the expedition participants, there is a phrase: "You don't want to stand in the center of the circle. The body responds differently than in other places. The pressure is strange, as if the earth is retreating slightly." The most controversial part of the report concerns rumors gathered among local residents. One said that when he was a child, elders took him to this site and told him, "They built upwards here without touching the ground." Another claimed to have seen a transparent wall, like water, rise above the circle one evening. These are oral traditions, unverifiable, but they agree with one other detail. The shape of the foundation does not allow for a heavy superstructure. It is too thin, without internal locks or recesses. No tower, either stone or brick, could have been erected on such a foundation without additional supports. Then, a hypothesis arises. Perhaps there was no tower in the conventional sense. Perhaps the object was elevated, not necessarily flying, not necessarily hovering, but it was elevated, structurally, not architecturally. This idea sounds like speculation, but it is supported by an analysis of proportions. The center of the platform is cut precisely according to the golden ratio. The diameter, angles, and offsets all correspond to the proportions used in acoustic resonators. If a sound source is placed in the center, the stones reflected in a spiral. This is physically measurable. Some researchers speculate that the structure could have been a sonic lift, not literally, not levitation, but rather weight manipulation through resonance. Modern experiments show that high-power sound can temporarily move objects when the frequencies are tuned correctly, but this requires energy and precision. If this knowledge existed, it is lost. Or perhaps it remains only in form, in a circle, in stones, in a position that no one can explain, but which again and again produces deviations in the readings. Now the platform is abandoned. Not a single sign, not a single plaque, only coordinates, filed in reports in the archives of Tehran and Paris. The place is not considered a monument. You can pass by it and not notice, and yet it exists. Perhaps there was a tower here, or perhaps it is only a memory that it hung and did not stand. We don't know. We just feel that in this place everything is not quite as it should be, as if something is still hanging, not in the air, but in time, and it hasn't disappeared. It's just become invisible. A city on a mountain that no one can see twice. In the highlands of Colombia, in the Sierra Nevada de Santa Marta region, lies a forested area rarely visited even by locals. In this part of the country, there are dozens of trails leading to the remains of pre-Hispanic settlements. Some of them are recognized as archaeological heritage, others remain nameless, overgrown, and hidden from view. One such case was recorded in 2004. A group of 3 independent researchers surveying the region's biodiversity came across an old stone staircase that had been almost completely swallowed up by earth and roots. They began to climb. The staircase led upward, serpentine, not destroyed, but clearly ancient. As they climbed, stone platforms began, laid out in the form of terraces. Then, the remains of walls, rectangular foundations, the foundation of a temple. At an altitude of about 2,000 meters, the view opened up, an entire system of buildings connected by paths, with a central square laid out in a circle. No tourists, no signs, no markers, only silence and the feeling that the place was forgotten, but not destroyed. The researchers filmed a video, recorded coordinates, and took photographs. They planned to return with the main group. 3 weeks later, the expedition repeated itself. The same people, the same equipment, the same coordinates. But there was no ladder, there was no path, only a cliff covered with small stones. At the top, impenetrable thickets, and no trace of foundations, walls, or a square there. The GPS indicated the same point. The altitude was the same. The landscape was unrecognizable. Attempts to locate the structures continued for 2 days. None of the routes matched the previous ones. Where the terrace in the photograph was, there turned out to be a slope with a catchment area. Where the temple had been, there was a stone slab without traces of masonry. A hypothesis was put forward. Perhaps the satellite data was erroneous, but the markers were preserved. They matched in time and coordinates. The photos remained. They showed buildings, stone platforms, corners, trees growing along the property lines. Everything was just like in reality, but no one ever saw it again. Some suggest the explorers were mistaken, tired, confused about the terrain, perhaps. But their path has been recorded, and it leads to where there is nothing else. Later attempts to find the city came to nothing. Different routes, different groups. None saw any buildings, not a single wall, not a single foundation. The locals, when they heard the description of the place, responded simply, You have found what sometimes opens, but does not remain. They have no name for the city, no legends, only a word, shadow. In their language it signifies not only the absence of light, but also that which was there but did not remain. Some researchers have tried to explain this by an atmospheric effect, an illusion caused by overwork or changes in pressure. Possibly. But the photo is not an illusion. The video is not confused. The shadows fall correctly. The perspective is maintained. This is not a trick of perception. One of the pictures, taken in the evening, shows a building with an arch. Inside the arch there is a ledge on which lies an object that looks like an ornamented slab. On the edge of the arch is the shadow of a man, one of those who stood there. The shadow is perfect. It falls at an angle. This cannot be staged. It happened. But now there's nothing left of that city. Not a single piece of evidence except the files. Not a single witness except those three. Not a single attempt to retrace the route. With success. Perhaps the city existed. Perhaps it didn't disappear but simply doesn't repeat itself, like some dreams. You remember how you got there, but you can't go back. A map showing what should not have existed. In 1929, a scroll was found in Istanbul's Topkapi Saray, among thousands of Ottoman Empire archival documents. It was approximately 1 meter long and written on treated leather. The author was known, Piri Reis, an admiral and cartographer who served under Sultan Selim I. He lived at the beginning of the 16th century and compiled maps based on the data available to the Navy at that time. But one detail of this map caused a chain reaction of interest. On the southern part of the scroll was depicted an unknown contour, a coastline extending far south from known South America. There were no cities on it, only mountains, rivers, and small markings. A modern comparison has shown that the contour resembles the coast of Antarctica, but with one difference. It is depicted without ice cover. This caused controversy. Antarctica was officially discovered in 1820. Before that, it had not been depicted on maps. In the 16th century, there were no instruments or routes that would have allowed its contours to be recorded, and especially without ice. However, the outline on the Piri Reis map matches the profile of the subglacial coastline reconstructed using modern radar. This isn't an obvious coincidence. It's a topographic match. The contours, bays, and protrusions are precise down to the kilometer level. How is this possible? Piri Reis himself cites his sources. He claims to have used older maps obtained from other navigators and libraries. In his explanation, he writes that this data is from a time unknown to us. He doesn't name names. He doesn't cite the originals, only the results. Some think it's a coincidence, artistic intuition, reconstruction based on rumors. But then why do not only the shapes match, but also the orientation and the absence of glaciers? Modern scientists speculate that the coastline may have been partially exposed in ancient times during a temporary warming period. There is a hypothesis that part of Antarctica may have been ice-free about 12,000 years ago. In that case, the map could be redrawn from an older source. But then another question arises. Who saw it? Who had the technology to navigate to southern latitudes before the beginning of written history? And most importantly, who was able to record, compare, and transfer this data into a coordinate system suitable for subsequent generations? This is not the only example. There are other maps, Orontius Phineas, Bush, Haji Ahmet, that also depict the southern lands with astonishing accuracy. Perhaps they use the same basis, a map that no longer exists, but which once existed. Some alternative history proponents suggest that in prehistoric times there existed a maritime civilization with skills in long-distance navigation and cartography. Almost no traces of it remain, only fragments, only coincidences, only inconsistencies. The Piri Reis map is not a fake, not a myth. It is a document, researched, kept, authentic, and it depicts something that should not have been there at the time. Maybe it is a mistake. It could be. Maybe it is a coincidence. It happens. But sometimes, if one detail doesn't match, it's a question mark. And if there are several, it's already a structure. And then the map becomes not a representation of geography, but a trace of someone who already knew what would only be discovered 300 years later. A people who deliberately buried their culture. In the southeastern Turkey region of Sanliurfa, something was discovered at the end of the 20th century that initially seemed to be just another hill. It was called Tepelik. There are hundreds of similar hills in the region, Many are artificial, formed by layers of human activity. Locals knew that the remains of settlements could be hidden under such embankments, but Teplic turned out to be different. In 1994, German archaeologist Klaus Schmidt began excavations on this hill, which would later be named Göbekli Tepe. And almost immediately it became clear. Beneath it lay more than just a settlement. Beneath it lay a complex built thousands of years before the first known cities. Enormous T-shaped stone columns decorated with carvings, walls laid out with mathematical precision, ring-shaped platforms, animals, signs, abstractions. Everything is hand-carved from solid stone. No metal, no wheels, no writing. Göbekli Tepe dates back to around 9500 BC. This is not a mistake. It is confirmed by analysis of organic remains, radiocarbon dating, and stratigraphy. This is before agriculture, before settlements, before temples, before everything. But there is one aspect that makes Göbekli Tepe special. It was filled in deliberately, not destroyed, not abandoned, but carefully, layer by layer, filled with small rubble, debris, sand. No signs of haste, no signs of violence, not a disaster, not a fire, but a solution. It's strange. Archaeologically, it's a rarity. Usually abandoned places remain destroyed, partially dismantled, slowly disappearing. This is different. The complex has been mothballed. Complex, labor-intensive, created with effort, and then buried, as if so no one would see. Why? Some believe it was a ritual, the closing of a sanctuary, a cycle completed by its own concealment, as if the act of creation itself were not the end, but only a stage, followed by erasure. Create and bury. There is another version, that whatever was here turned out to be dangerous, not in the physical sense, but in the knowledge sense. Perhaps it was a complex connected with astronomy, with observation, with a certain type of worldview that needed to be removed from practice. And the only way was to bury it in the ground. There are no written traces of that time, no explanations, no treatises, only form, only orientations, only animals, birds, hands, elongated symbols. Some columns depict scenes that are still not understood. They are not repeated elsewhere. They are not associated with other cultures. Göbekli Tepe, isolated, in time, in style, in the decision to leave. When archaeologists began to uncover one circle, another appeared underneath it, smaller, older, then another. It was as if each new circle was built on top of the previous one, and then everything was buried. The cycle repeated. This is not a mistake. This is a repeated intention, creation and erasure. Why? Perhaps it was a culture for which permanence had no meaning. Perhaps their goal was not to preserve, but to let go. Perhaps they knew that everything built would eventually become a lie. And so, as not to leave behind a lie, they buried the truth. Now, 12,000 years later, we are uncovering these circles, peeling back layer after layer, trying to understand, but maybe understanding isn't what they wanted. Maybe all they wanted was for us to know. There was once something important here, and they hid it. Not because they were afraid, but because it was gone. City walls facing inwards. In the north of modern-day Jordan, on a plateau near the Zarqa River Valley, archaeologists have explored the ruins of a little-known settlement dating to the late Bronze Age. It is not marked on major maps and is not included among the region's most important cultural centers. And yet, there are remains of streets, squares, fragments of pottery and stone buildings. Everything indicates that this was once a living place. But there is one feature that distinguishes it from others. The city is surrounded by a wall. This is not uncommon. Defensive walls were common practice at the time. But in this case, the wall is laid out from the inside out. On the outside, there's a smooth surface, unprotected by loopholes. On the inside, there are fortifications, passages, support niches, and defensive approaches. Everything that would normally face the enemy here faces the city center. This was mistaken for a construction error. Perhaps the walls had been rebuilt, perhaps the landmark had changed, but archaeological layers show that the wall was built at the same time as the building. The foundation is common, the fastenings are primary, this is not a remodel, this is a solution. The question arises, From whom was the city defending itself? If the enemy was outside, the structure is illogical. If from the inside, then the wall takes on a different meaning. Perhaps it wasn't defensive, but ritual. Perhaps the wall's purpose wasn't to keep the enemy out, but to keep something in. In the central part of the city, along the axis of the walls, there is an open circular courtyard paved with slabs. It is empty, no traces of fire, no columns, just a circle with a depression in the center. It does not contain water, it does not lead into the depths, just a stone circle within a circle, like a target. Some believe it's a cult structure, a ritual center. But then why the wall? Why not a temple? Why are the fighting platforms facing inward? There is a carving on one section of the wall, a recurring motif, a curved figure with outstretched arms, no faces, no clothing, only movement. It is directed towards the center, as if repulsive. When researchers conducted an acoustic analysis, it turned out that the walls reflected sound inward, creating a reinforcing effect. If someone spoke near the inner wall, the echo returned to the center of the courtyard, amplifying it. This is not a bug, it's the design. Maybe the walls weren't built to repel the enemy, but to contain the voice, or whatever comes with it. The city didn't last long. The layers show that life lasted 2 or 3 generations. Then, a fire. Not a strong one. No destruction of walls, only houses, and disappearance. No traces of a return, no new buildings, only sand and silence. No texts, no name. Neither in Assyrian nor Egyptian sources, the city remained nameless. Only a plan. Only the direction of the wall. Only an outline. Proponents of the anthropological theory believe the orientation of the walls is symbolic, that it reflects a model of the world where danger is not external, where the ritual is not for an external god, but for an internal one, where the city is not a defense, but a capsule. Perhaps that was the case. Or perhaps they simply built the city differently because they knew. Sometimes protection isn't a barrier, but a form of memory, of something that once emerged from within, a structure without a single trace of a tool. In western Sardinia, at the foot of the Monte Santa Maria Plateau, lie ruins that are classified in archaeological records under the technical code S41. The site was first described in 1938 as part of a megalithic complex characteristic of the island's prehistoric structures. At first, no one paid much attention. The area is replete with remnants of the Nuragic culture, round towers, walls, burials. But object S41 was different. Not in its shape, but in its processing. This is neither a tower nor a temple. It is a massive platform, partially cut into the rock, with 4 protrusions on the sides. Everything would be fine, if not for one detail. Not a single trace of processing was found on the entire object. No cut, no chip, no direction of impact. The surface is perfectly smooth, like polished limestone, with no signs of impact, sawing, or crushing. Even microscopic analysis revealed no lines of work. The stone looks like it was formed, not processed, as if it were poured, not cut. But it's not concrete. It's not an artificial material. It's limestone, natural, dense, with a uniform crystalline structure. This contradicts all known building practices in Sardinia. No culture that lived here had access to technology capable of processing stone without leaving traces. Marks always remain, from copper, bronze, and iron tools. Even stone ones, especially so. The soil layer above the platform indicates an age of at least 4,000 years, possibly more. Precise dating has not been achieved because there is no organic material, only stone. Researchers have suggested that the shape may have been formed naturally. Erosion, wind, water, but the structure is too regular. The angles are right angles. The lines are parallel. All the projections are equal. This is not a spontaneous form. There's a depression on the surface of the platform, almost a circle, about 3 meters in diameter, a palm's depth. It's perfectly smooth. No traces of drips, no cracks, as if it had been pressed in. But the stone isn't malleable. An attempt to model the form in 3D revealed that the structure is constructed according to the principle of geometric symmetry, with the center in the depression. It's as if everything else grows from there. Not in the architectural sense, but in the sense of directional crystallization. It's absurd. But there are no other hypotheses. No known culture could have done this. even in theory, even with the knowledge, there is no instrument that could do it without leaving a trace. There are analogies. The monolith in Baalbek, the processing in Sacsayhuaman, the laser precision in the temples of India. But everywhere, micro-traces remain. And here, emptiness, a perfect surface, without beginning, without a trace of a hand. Alternative archaeologists believe this is a remnant of a lost technology, perhaps knowledge of frequency processing, sound, pressure, vibration, perhaps not a tool, but a state of being. But without evidence, it's all just a hypothesis. What's left? The platform stands. It doesn't crack. It doesn't sink into the ground. It doesn't change. It's stable. It is uninhabited. There are no traces of life around, no bones, no ceramics, no coal, only dust and grass along the edges, as if someone once did this and left, and now it just is, without function, without purpose, without past. And when you stand next to it, you can't tell what it is, only that it's unlike anything else. Not like a temple, not like an altar, not like technology. It doesn't fit. It's as if someone left behind a geometric thought, but not an explanation. And now, we only watch and remain silent, because even our tools leave no trace. It's as if the platform refuses to let history in. The forgotten network of underground bridges. On the border of Slovakia and Hungary, in an area where gentle hills give way to plateaus, there's a network of underground passages, only partially known. The first mentions of them date back to the 18th century, as mining passages used for the extraction of salt and iron. But in the 20th century, geologists discovered that some of them extend far beyond logistical needs. Some tunnels don't lead to deposits. They connect points unrelated to mining. They are simply called passages. Passages because they don't lead to a destination. They lead between. While excavating one of the sites in 1993, the team came across a wide stone arch underground. The walls are unlined. The stone is hand-laid. The arch is part of a gallery that connects two hills separated by a valley. On the surface, there is nothing. No settlement, no fortress, no old road, only grass. And underground, a bridge connecting two voids. Why? There are more than a dozen such bridges. They are located under hills, within a 20-kilometer zone. The depth is from 8 to 20 meters. The walls are smooth. The ceilings are preserved. The arches are laid without mortar, with a precise fit. The style is uniform. Archaeologists compare this to Roman engineering solutions. But the technique is different. There are no caissons, no supports. The structure relies on weight distribution, not a framework. This speaks of deliberate design. But the main thing is the purpose. No gallery leads to a functional center, not to a mine, not to a temple, not to a storage facility, only from point to point. Sometimes these points are simply emptiness, sometimes they are a dead end. And yet, there is a passage. It was made laboriously, by hand, without tools that left a trace. Only blocks, only a vault, only a passage. One hypothesis is that these are ritual canals. Perhaps the passages were used in rituals. But there are no traces of sacrifices, no ashes, no bones, no inscriptions. Others suggest it's knowledge of underground navigation. People could move around without being seen. But who needed to hide in an era when there were no cities here? Others say it's an imitation, that someone copied the structure without understanding it. Perhaps they copied something more ancient, but then where is the original? Some tunnels have acoustic peculiarities. The sound increases as you step. Some curves create the effect of complete silence. There are sections where the only sound you can hear is your own breathing, and even that is distorted. One tunnel leads to a stone circle, an empty, domed room. In the center is a pedestal. No symbols, no function. But the sound in this room doesn't leave. It returns, without distortion, as if the air is trapped. The locals call this place the throat of the earth, but no one can say who built it. There are no legends, only feelings. Some are afraid to approach, not out of fear, but out of an incomprehensible respect. Official documents describe the tunnels as secondary rock formations with non-standard engineering logic. This is a technical way of saying we don't understand their purpose. Today, most of the passages are closed. Some are buried, others have collapsed. But the network still exists. It exists in silence, without light, without routes. Maybe these bridges were for something we no longer do, for journeys that were not physical, for a connection that wasn't on the surface. Maybe it's all just labor and stone. Or maybe we're looking in the wrong place, and bridges don't connect space, but time. An island that has appeared on maps for 300 years. Between Iceland and Ireland in the North Atlantic Ocean, an island has been marked on nautical charts for centuries. Its name has changed. Sometimes it was called Friesland, but the essence remained. It was recorded, described, outlined. It had a shape, coordinates, a history. It first appears on a map by Niccolò Zeno, dating from 1558. There it is depicted as a large island, almost square, with a city and mountains. The description was allegedly accompanied by letters mentioning that there is civilization on the island. People, light, language. Next are the maps of Gerhard Mercator, the famous cartographer who founded the projection system still used today. Also includes the island in his materials, not as a rumor, but as a fact. Then there were Janssen, Ortelius, and even the British Admiralty archives. Right up until the early 19th century, the island was present. It had a shape, a scale, a climate. Some maps even describe the flora, but in reality, it doesn't exist. Numerous expeditions in the 19th and 20th centuries set out for the designated area. The result, nothing. Only ocean. No rocks, no shoals, no traces, no magnetic anomalies. An ordinary sea surface. The question arises, how could the object remain on the maps for so long? There are several options. The first is a mistake. One captain marked something on the map that wasn't there. The others repeated it. This has happened, but 3 centuries, in a system where cartographic accuracy matters. The second is a mirage. Perhaps a special atmospheric phenomenon allowed the reflection of the Earth to be seen. But mirages don't repeat themselves exactly, and the coordinates were indicated with astonishing consistency. The third is that the island existed but disappeared. Perhaps it was volcanic. Perhaps it was an underwater platform that was destroyed. But the ocean depth in that area does not indicate recent geological shifts. There are no traces of uplift or destruction of the land. One version of the British Archive contains a note. Sailors avoid this place. They are not sure what they saw, but they are sure what they felt. The entry is dated 1783. Modern researchers point out that Friesland is not an isolated case. Similar phantom islands appear and disappear. Sandy Atlan off the coast of Australia. Ice demons off Canada. All of them were on maps. They were named. And then they disappeared. Friesland, or High Brasil, is unique in that it is described as inhabited. One 14th century manuscript says that a ship, lost on course, reached the island but was unable to land. It was surrounded by fog, and from the shore came a light. Not fires, but a glow. This is a legend, but behind it lies a recurring phenomenon. An island that someone saw, recorded, and which refused to repeat itself. Today, High Brasil no longer appears on modern maps. Only cartography historians and enthusiasts know about it. The place in the ocean where it should be is silent. Satellites see nothing. Navigation proceeds without a hitch, but on old maps it is there. Clear, reliable, confident, as if it was once part of the known world, and then it ceased to be. The road leading to nowhere, outside of culture. In South America, in the Peruvian part of the Nazca Plateau, there's a site that has long attracted little attention. Attention has traditionally been drawn to the lines, enormous geoglyphs depicting animals, figures, and abstractions. But away from them, on the elevated part of the plateau, there is a road, straight as a blueprint, about 3 meters wide, more than 17 kilometers long. It's not visible from the ground in its entirety. Only from the air can you see how linear it is. It doesn't curve. It doesn't follow the terrain. It passes over hills and rocky areas as if nothing else matters, as if someone drew a line and made a path along it. It leads into emptiness. There is nothing at either end of it. No temple, no settlement, no water, only sand, sand and stone. No traces of use. No expansions, no fortifications. The road is paved with a burnt gravel crust. Its surface is compact and leveled. However, the road is not a wheeled one. There are no traces of potholes, no hoofprints. This is not a path for vehicles. It is a strip, formed as if intended not for movement, but for direction. The first study was conducted in the 1930s. Back then, it was considered part of a religious infrastructure, perhaps through ritual. But ritual requires points. A beginning, a climax, an end. Here, there is no beginning and no end. Only movement in a straight line, into a landscape where there is not even a hint of man-made art. Then another theory was put forward: astronomical orientation. Perhaps the road points to the sunrise on the day of the solstice, but tests showed a deviation of several degrees. This does not correspond to ritual precision, and most importantly, the Nazca lines usually point to a visible object. Here, they point to an empty sky. Some archaeologists began to compare the road with similar objects in Egypt, Mesoamerica, and Tibet. Everywhere, such roads connect. A temple with a tomb, a city with a burial vault, a point of power with a place of sacrifice. Here, there is no second point. Later, another peculiarity was noticed. The road is inconvenient to walk on. The stones reflect the light. The surface is hard. Even without shoes, local residents find it difficult to move on it. Animals go around it. This is not a path designed for movement. It is a path designed for presence. Locals avoid it, not because they're afraid, but because it leads nowhere. This is not a metaphor. It is a fact. The road exists. It is smooth, visible from space, marked on maps. But in both directions there is emptiness. One hypothesis is that it is a direction line, not for people, for sight, perhaps for a celestial object, or for something that was meant to be seen from above, not as part of a map, but as a message. But to whom was this message addressed? Someone put effort into creating a path, leading not to the goal, but to nothing, or to where once there was something and disappeared, or to where there never was anything except the road itself. Maybe that was the point, to leave the path, not to follow it, but so that it simply was. Straight, wind, light, no movement, just a line. A calendar that ends before it even begins. In the desert area on the border of Mexico and Guatemala, in an area not marked on popular archaeological routes, in 1971, a group of independent researchers discovered a fragment of a stone slab. The slab was partially pressed into the ground, overgrown with roots. Not a single local resident knew it was there. Not a single catalog mentioned it. It was not a temple. It was not a center. Just a fragment. Half. On the outside are concentric circles, barely visible. There were 15 of them. All were cut with high precision, not a drawing, not a symbol, not decoration. They did not contain animals, had no decorative purpose, only geometry. At first glance, the object resembled a calendar. This is not uncommon in Central America. The civilizations of the region, the Mayans, Olmecs, and Zapotecs, created complex, precise systems of chronology based on astronomy. But this object was different. First of all, it had no beginning. The circles went outward from the center, as usual. But in the center there was nothing. No date, no marker, no zero symbol. Nothing. Just a smooth surface. Secondly, the last 3 circles on the periphery were empty. Where other calendars marked days, gods, and events, here was a smooth stone ring, as if the carving had stopped, or never begun. It was later discovered that everything depicted on the slab ends within the first 9 circles. The rest are decorated but contain no data. A hypothesis has been put forward. This is an unfinished calendar. It was started, but not finished. The problem is that the level of precision of the circle indicates that it is in the final stage of carving. In such systems, circles are not cut out first, but completed. Empty rings are not a consequence of incompleteness. They are a solution. When scanning, it turned out that the empty rings have a differently distributed depth. Not chaotically, not defectively, but with a certain rhythm, as if it were not a calendar of time, but a calendar of disappearance. It sounds strange, but the data shows that the values within the first 9 circles correspond to the known cycles of the Mayan system, the 260-day cycle, the solar year, the Venusian phases. It's all there. It all matches. But beyond that, nothing. The final circles are not only empty, they are sealed. Their surface is polished, as if someone deliberately decided there will be nothing there. Local shamans, contacted by the researchers, looked at the slab and said briefly that this circle wasn't about counting. It was about endings. When asked about endings of what, they didn't answer. It later turned out that in local mythology there is a legend about a day that will be, but will not come. This is a day that is on every calendar but is not marked. Not because it does not exist, but because it is beyond time. Not a mistake, but a boundary. Some believe it is a philosophical concept, the limit of counting, a cycle that has no end because it never began, a calendar that has not been started but is already completed. This slab may be an attempt to express this physically, not in words, but in structure. Researchers have tried to reconstruct the original shape. Perhaps the slab was part of a larger circle, but there are no other fragments in the surrounding area. No stones, no walls, nothing to indicate a temple, a platform, or an observatory. Everything indicates that the slab was independent, not part of a complex, but a center in itself. What's particularly interesting is that, according to calculations, if the plate had continued, its outer circle would have coincided with a date close to our year 2025. This doesn't mean it predicted anything, but the coincidence was recorded. Some proponents of alternative hypotheses believe that the plate marks a moment of reset, not as a catastrophe, but as a return to a point where time did not begin. Not the end of the world, but a departure from time. It's hard to express, but the form itself says it all. Where there should be zero, there's silence. Where there should be a finale, there's a surface. No dates, no numbers, just the trace of a circle. Nothing more. Today the slab is kept in a private collection. It cannot be seen. It is not exhibited. Only photographs. Only copies. And yet, it remains. A calendar that has no beginning. A calendar in which the date is silence. Not because it was not written down, but because it was intended that way. Writings of a civilization that no one remembers. In 1986, near the ancient city of Shush in Iran, archaeologists were conducting planned excavations on the outskirts of a well-known Elamite complex. The site did not seem promising. Calculations indicated that the area was used for outbuildings, possibly grain storage. However, at a depth of just over 1.5 meters, a find was discovered that did not fit into any of the existing systems. It was a baked clay box, heavy, rectangular, with a sealed edge. At first, they thought it was a burial urn, but when they opened it, they found plates inside, laid horizontally, almost like pages. 19 in all. Each one was made of thin, compressed slate, with symbols etched into its surface. These weren't drawings. They were text. None of the symbols matched any of the known scripts of the region, neither Sumerian, nor Elamite, nor Urartian signs. The symbols resembled a linear structure, but lacked grammatical logic. There were repetitions, but the rhythm was elusive. Some glyphs stood alone. Others were grouped. The composition resembled a script, but not a language. Initial decipherments yielded no results. Researchers suggested that it was a counting system or code. However, statistical analysis revealed a stable frequency distribution characteristic of a linguistic system, not a numerical one. Later, linguists joined the work. One of them, Dr. Hosseini, suggested that what we were seeing was not a code or a language of live communication, but a written protocol of knowledge, ordered, verified, and intended not for communication, but for storage. One of the plates revealed structures resembling maps. Where the text turns to symbols, the outlines of rivers and plateaus similar to those in the northern Zagros Mountains can be traced. However, the coordinates do not match modern ones. Perhaps this represents a different geography, known but no longer recorded. The main thing is that no culture in the region mentions the authors of these tablets. There are no references, no borrowings, neither in late Elamite nor in early Persian. It is as if those who wrote this text left no other traces. This is impossible. Writing is the pinnacle of accumulated knowledge. It is not created in isolation. It is preceded by craft, structure, need. But here there is no chain, only an object, and no traces before or after. Some people think it's a marginal culture, small in numbers, short-lived, perhaps. But then the question arises, why create protocols that no one is supposed to read? The plates are carefully laid out. The clay they were stored in is dense, baked, everything points to preservation, as if something important was being passed on, and to no one. The date is approximately the 12th century BC, a time of migrations, destruction, and shifting cultural vectors. Perhaps this is the remnant of knowledge that was not incorporated into the new systems. Perhaps it is a conscious separation from them. One of the texts features a noticeable repetition, the same symbol, repeated 47 times. Next to it is another, only once. Linguists are unsure how to interpret this, but some believe it could be a name and signature, as if each sign were a personality. Today, the tablets are kept in a museum in Tehran. They are being studied, but slowly. The material is fragile. Every movement risks destruction. Electronic copies are available, but without decryption, they don't speak. Maybe someday they will be understood. Maybe not. Not because they are complex, but because they are not tied to any of the systems by which we read the past. And perhaps this is not a mistake, but a choice. A culture that wrote for itself and understood that no one else would read it. A city built without doors. In the northwestern part of Pakistan, near the border with Afghanistan, in the Kohat Valley, excavations were started in 1962 by a joint team of Pakistani and British archaeologists. The region is poorly studied. It is located in a remote mountainous area where sediment erodes the soil and tectonic shifts gradually expose what has lain beneath layers of earth and rock for centuries. The discovered settlement was initially no different from many others: rectangular foundations, courtyards, and paved stone streets. It was dated to approximately the 4th millennium BC, but after a few weeks of work it became clear something was wrong here. Not a single building had an entrance. No doorways, niches, or traces of frames were found in the foundations or lower levels of the walls. These were not found in residential buildings, administrative structures, or potential storage areas. All walls were solid, the stonework was smooth, and the joints were precise but closed. Initially, it was assumed that the doorways were located higher, perhaps an entrance through the roof. This practice is well known. In some Mesoamerican and Middle Eastern cultures, entry was through the ceiling, via stairs, or using movable ceilings. However, upon further investigation, not a single staircase was found, either inside or outside the buildings. No traces of flooring, no reinforcement, no elements indicating vertical access. Each structure is like a sealed mold. A square was discovered in the central part of the complex. Ceramic fragments, traces of fireplaces, and organic remains were found there. This suggests that people lived here. They used the space. They ate. They performed rituals. But they lived in a space with no entrances. Some have suggested that the building could have been used as a storage facility, where something was placed and then sealed. But the scale of the settlement and its regular structure suggest otherwise. It is a city, with streets, geometry, drainage systems. It was built not as a warehouse, but as a home. Notches were discovered on the interior walls of some buildings. They are located high, almost under the ceiling. Perhaps they were used for flooring, or perhaps for something else. But no remains of wood or metal fastenings were found. One hypothesis is that the buildings were used not for habitation, but as capsules, spaces within which something else took place. Isolation, ritual, memory storage. But then why does the city consist only of such buildings? If it was a religious complex, why does it occupy the entire territory? Why is there no transition between the sacred and the everyday? There is no distinction here. The entire structure is identical. Later, a section of the wall with symbols was found. Geometric figures laid out with small stones. They resemble stylized loops or spirals. Not a single symbol was recognized. There is no connection with known systems, but they repeat in the same order, as if they were recording movement, not by space, but by state. Not a single door has been found. When the research was completed, one of the archaeologists wrote in his diary, "This is a city that was built not to be entered, or perhaps not to be exited. What this means is unclear." Perhaps architecture reflects a worldview, a need to undivide space into internal and external. Perhaps it's a vestige of a culture in which the private and the public weren't opposed, where space was perceived not as protection, but as a slowing down. Or maybe it's an attempt to stop, to create a place that can't be entered, but which is here. It's not hidden, not disguised, only closed from the start. Today, the ruins of this city are abandoned. There are no tourists, no security. Locals avoid the place, saying it's not bad, but strange. It doesn't scare you. But it doesn't call you either. You can still see the outlines of buildings. You can still walk along the streets. But everything you see is external. There is no transition inside. Only facades. Only form. And this, perhaps, is all that remains of the city that existed in its own closed rhythm. Children buried with stars on their bones. In 2014, a group of archaeologists explored permafrost sites near the Kolyma River in northeastern Siberia, where soil anomalies had been recorded. With climate change and thawing of ancient layers, new areas of interest began to emerge. One of them, designated Layer K17, revealed a find that didn't fit into the usual picture from the start. It was a burial. Small. Shallow. Inside were the skeletons of two children. They were approximately 3 to 5 years old. They were positioned parallel to each other, facing northwest. There was no coffin or sarcophagus, only earth, a stone base, and the remains of organic material. At first, the find seemed ordinary. Neolithic burials are known in the region, but a closer examination of the bones revealed symbols carved into the surfaces of the skull, humerus, and pelvis. They weren't applied after death. There are no signs of damage, no cracks, no signs of healing. The symbols seem to have grown with the bone, located inside, barely visible. Only under special lighting did they appear as a network of thin lines forming star-shaped shapes. Analysis revealed that the bone structure contained mineral inclusions containing rare earth elements. Their source is unknown. The surrounding soil contains no such compounds. Only clay, ice, and peat are nearby. The chemical composition indicates that the elements entered the body before death, probably during life. But how exactly is unclear. They are not toxic. They leave no traces of poisoning. They simply exist within the bone structure in a geometric pattern. The shapes themselves resemble constellations. One of the drawings is an almost exact projection of Orion. Another is the Pleiades. But this is not identity, but a structural correspondence. The arrangement of points, angles, connections. This cannot be a coincidence. It can't be an interpretation. The lines are inside the bone. No known ritual, no technique could leave such a precise trace inside living tissue. No other remains were found nearby. Just two. No adult, no artifacts, no settlement. Just two people, all alone, in the permafrost. Some researchers have hypothesized that children may have been part of a ritual, possibly related to a star cult. However, no traces of such a cult have been found in this region, not in monuments, petroglyphs, or in adjacent cultures. Another version is a genetic mutation, but it doesn't explain the geometry. Mutations don't draw patterns, they deform. Here, however, there is order. An attempt was made to find analogies. In Mongolia, in Yakutia, in northern China, nothing similar has been recorded. The symbols are unique. The pattern is not repeated. Paleogenetic analysis revealed no connection with known populations. The genome partially overlaps with Siberian hunters, but has significant differences. It appears to be a closed lineage, not mixed or continued. Some believe the children are aliens from another community that has disappeared. But then why are they the only ones left? Why were they left alone? The peace of their bodies was undisturbed. No signs of violence, no attempt to hide. All that is there is neatness, symmetry, and the impossibility of explanation. The remains are currently being stored in a special lab. The bones are handled only with gloves. Research continues, but there's no point, no data, no culture, no context, just children, and a pattern of stars that no one intended, but which still appeared. A song carved in the ground. In the southwest of India, in the state of Karnataka, near the Tungabhadra River, archaeologists have discovered an object that was long considered a fragment of agricultural terracing. From the air, the site appeared as a series of carved ledges along the slope. Regular, symmetrical, almost perfectly repeated. The site stretches for more than a kilometer and encompasses several levels connected by narrow cuts reminiscent of ancient steps. The first studies were carried out in the 1980s, but then the attention of archaeologists focused on the larger sites in the region, the ruins of Vijayanagara, the capital of the empire of the same name. The site was considered late Shas, possibly colonial. However, in 2016, a digital topographic survey was conducted. It revealed something odd. All the benches on the site are not simply symmetrical. They are arranged in a precise relationship to the distance, angle, and depth of the cut. The object resembled not so much a terrace as a waveform imprinted in stone. During subsequent measurements, geophysicists proposed superimposing the structure's shape onto the spectrogram. The coincidence was unexpected. One of the relief fragments coincided with the visual projection of the sound wave, not in the details, but in the form, structure, and logic of construction. The three-dimensional relief profile turned out to be identical to certain types of frequencies used in ritual instruments of southern India. The proposition was simple. What if it is not a terrace, not a canal, not a wall? What if the object is a recording of sound, made in a material not intended to be read, but to record form? Later, acoustics specialists joined the work. One of them, Dr. Rajesh Aravind, conducted computer modeling. He converted the cut profile into audio signal parameters and ran it through a frequency generator. The result was neither music nor speech, but the structure had a sound amplitude. It was not chaotic, it was not noise, it was not a technical interference, it was a stable wave. The experiment was repeated in a different area. The same system, the same logic. Different signals, but a single model. The object began to be perceived differently, no longer as the result of economic activity, but as an engineering structure based on the principles of geometry and wave analysis, not to be walked on, Bezidu, but to be perceived, perhaps in a different register. Proponents of traditional archaeology objected. They believed the shape could be the result of erosion, the consequence of water flows, destruction, or weathering. But none of these explanations explained the regularity. The terrain wasn't just leveled, it was perfectly coordinated, as if someone had drawn it with a ruler and compass. The stone was granite. It's not easy to work. There were no tool marks, no seams, no blocks. Just a cut, as if the rock had been peeled away in layers, not carved out. One hypothesis suggested that this was the result of an impact, perhaps vibration or pressure, but then the shape would be destructive. Here, however, the rhythm is preserved. The strangest thing began when changes in sound began to be detected near the site. Groups passing through the area noticed that the sound of their footsteps changed as they moved. Not just an echo, but an amplitude modulation, as if the ground itself was telling them how to move. One of the researchers conducted an experiment. He began walking along a stretch of land with a metronome. With each step, the sound deviated, first toward an increase in frequency, then toward a decrease. This later coincided with fluctuations in the spectrum obtained from the terrain profile. What does this mean? Perhaps a sound sequence was once performed here, using the structure of the earth as a resonant foundation. Perhaps this is an architectural score, intended not for the eye, but for the ear. Monuments of this kind are common. In Peru, there are singing steps. In Burma, there are temples whose acoustics amplify a specific word. But nowhere is there a relief that conveys sound in form. Not a single note was written here. Not a single sign was left. Only a shape, only a stone, only a profile. It has been suggested that the object is a remnant of knowledge lost along with those who created it. Perhaps they conveyed meaning not through language, but through resonance, through a way of experiencing space, through the relationship between body and form. One of the expedition members said that this is not a memory of a song. It is the song itself, but in matter, and perhaps he is right. Perhaps once upon a time something really did sound here that could not be uttered by voice, only passed by, heard, not by ears but by movement, and now all that remains is form, extended, silent, precise. The object is not destroyed, it is still open, but almost no one knows that it exists. On satellite maps, it's marked as a fragment of agricultural work. In reports, it's an analyzed object. In reality, it's a rhythm etched in stone. It doesn't ask for an explanation, it doesn't require deciphering, it doesn't speak, but it's there. A ritual that is repeated without witnesses. In Iceland, on the Snæfellsnes Peninsula, there's a stretch of land that has been listed by weather stations for the past 60 years as unsuitable for construction. The reason isn't the climate, but rather regular surface changes. The soil there constantly rises and then subsides. Every few months, geodetic sensors detect a subtle vibration of the surface, which is not accompanied by seismic activity or temperature fluctuations. At first, this was attributed to the natural respiration of volcanic soil. The region is subject to geothermal activity. However, in 1973, during expanded geodetic monitoring, it was noticed that the fluctuations did not occur chaotically, but with a periodicity that fit into a 243-day cycle. During this time, the changes accumulate, and then, within 2 days, the area rises as a single plateau, then returns to its original position. The shape of the elevation is always the same. The radius is about 60 meters. The rise is from 6 to 9 centimeters. Visually, it is almost imperceptible, but the sensors confirm the surface is moving, slowly, without noise, without shifting the ground, as if something inside is lifting it up and then lowering it again. In 1981, an observation camp was established here for the first time. No events were recorded during the entire cycle. However, during the ascent, some participants reported a sound they could not record. It wasn't audible to the ear, but felt like pressure in the chest. The instruments didn't detect any frequencies, only a slight surge of electromagnetic noise. After that, silence. Geologists later sent soundings into the area, suggesting the presence of a void, an underground chamber or reservoir. But echolocation only revealed soil heterogeneity, not a cavity, not water, not gas. Something that selectively reflects the signal, as if there was a structure underground, neither dense nor loose, but transitional. After several years, attention to the site waned. It had no economic or construction value, but an independent group of researchers continued to record changes. By 2002, the cycle had not changed even a day. It was then that observations began that are difficult to explain. Satellite images taken at different times showed that as you ascend the plateau, paths appear. Not trails, not ruts, but smooth, almost symmetrical stripes in the grass, as if someone were moving in a circle. The diameter of these circles matched the geometry of the ascent. They disappeared after a few hours. No one came. The cameras recorded nothing. The equipment was in a secure mode. But traces appeared. One of the photographs shows a stone standing in the center of the circle. It wasn't there before. A day later, it was gone. No drag marks, no prints, just the brief presence of a shape, and then its absence. To call this phenomenon a ritual without participants. Something happened, but without action, without actors, without observable events, only a result. When the scientists attempted to remain still during the ascent, some described sensations similar to mild disorientation. One person experienced a brief loss of orientation. He reported standing for 10 seconds, but almost half an hour had passed. However, no medical abnormalities were detected. No anomalies in the structure of space have been recorded either. Simply a point at which something repeats regularly and stably, with a consistency that is not found in any known natural cycle. Attempts to decipher the geometry of the tracks have yielded no results. They do not fit into traditional measurement systems. But when compared with certain archetypal structures, mandalas, Venus observation diagrams, ancient Cambodian drawings, certain intersections emerge. Not exact ones, but consistent with the logic of the construction. This allowed us to assume that we are dealing with a ritual machine operating without human intervention, or with a process whose trace does not disappear because it does not depend on action. It is still impossible to explain this from a scientific point of view. There is no energy, no participant, no function, only repetition. And each time the relief rises again, it becomes clear. This is not an accident. This is a structure that does not cease, even if no one sees it. An observatory facing the wrong stars? On a high plateau in the Atlas Mountains in northern Morocco, a structure initially thought to be an ancient fortress was discovered in 1998. It consisted of a limestone ring surrounded by rectangular chambers. The central part was partially destroyed, but the inner circle was preserved well enough to measure angles and orientations. The diameter of the complex is about 60 meters. The walls are up to 2 meters thick at the base, but further measurements revealed that the structure bore no signs of military purpose. There were no observation towers, no weapons bays, no depressions, no underground chambers. Instead, there are successive planes located at precise angles to the horizon and cutouts in the stone walls through which the sun and stars pass on certain days. This has given reason to believe that the object is an ancient observatory. Such structures are known in many cultures: Stonehenge, Corral, the observatory at Uxmal, and Mayan structures. Their common feature is their orientation towards celestial bodies, the sun, the moon, the visible planets, and important celestial points. But the Moroccan site presented a problem. All its landmarks were misaligned. One of the passes was aimed not at the equinox sunrise, as expected, but at a point where there is currently nothing. The other was not at Polaris, but at an area with no known bright objects. All the main reference points were to the sky, which today appears empty. Calculations showed that when using the standard precessional model, in which the Earth's axis slowly changes direction over thousands of years, the orientation of the complex does not coincide with any of the known time periods. They do not correspond to the sky today, nor in 1000 BC, nor in 3000, nor in 10,000. With any permissible displacement of the celestial sphere, these angles do not lead to the stars. This creates a paradox. The object was clearly designed as an instrument. The geometry, repeatability, and precision indicate the use of celestial bodies as landmarks, but these landmarks are unverifiable. They do not exist in the known history of the sky. Some have suggested an alternative explanation. Perhaps the object was used not for observation, but for imitation. That is, this is not an observatory in the literal sense, but a replica of the starry sky intended for ritual use. But this version suffers from a lack of context. There are no images, no writing, no drawings, no symbols, only stone and angles. A fragment of a clay slab was found inside one of the compartments, revealing a fragment of a grid. Not a map, not a calendar, but a pattern resembling a projection. It also doesn't correspond to modern star systems. One of the researchers, Professor Hans Kalb, hypothesized that the complex might be oriented toward a celestial sphere that is no longer visible. That is, stars that have disappeared from Earth's field of view due to precession, or unknown objects that existed before the cataclysm that erased them from observation. This sounds speculative, but indirect evidence supports this theory. Several sections of the stonework contain symbols that, when superimposed on a geographic grid, resemble celestial coordinates. They are repeated, but do not point to actual objects. Perhaps they point to hypothetical ones. Another theory posits that the object was created during a period when the sky map was different, and that its creators may have recorded orientations that no longer exist in the conventional sense. Perhaps the landmarks weren't stars, but moving light sources. This would explain the shift. But it also raises more questions. If the landmarks have disappeared, why? If the object repeats something that no longer exists, then where does the knowledge come from? How could people who had no optics, measurements, or even writing create such a precise design, relying on the vanished sky? Proponents of the traditional approach return to the error theory. Perhaps observers misinterpreted the surrounding world. Perhaps everything was a coincidence. But in a system where every wall is oriented with minute precision, this seems unlikely. Today, the observatory remains intact. None of the landmarks coincide with those used in astronomy. And this is its main peculiarity. This is not a miscalculation. This is a different calculation. One in which the sky may have been arranged differently. A manuscript that names neither peoples, nor times, nor gods. In 1912, in a monastery library in southern Bohemia, the antiquarian Wilfried Voynich acquired a parchment manuscript that immediately stood out from the rest. It appeared to be about 200 pages long, each covered in elegant but incomprehensible handwriting. Between the lines are drawings, plants, circles, figures, graphs. Not a single word, not a single signature, not a date. Only letters that do not belong to any known alphabet. Later, the manuscript was named after its buyer, the Voynich manuscript. For a century, it was studied by cryptographers, historians, linguists, and botanists. None of the attempts to decipher the text were successful. The alphabet is unique. No symbol is repeated exactly. The grammatical structure suggests the presence of rules, but the meaning of these rules is unknown. The manuscript is divided into several conventional sections: botanical, with images of plants that do not exist in nature; astronomical, with circular diagrams that do not correspond to known maps of the sky; biological, with anatomical images not tied to any culture; prescription, with texts similar to descriptions but without numbers or names. Each section is systematic. No chaos, only neatness, repetition, as if someone wrote slowly, observing sequence. The paper is high quality. The ink is permanent. The drawings are confident. This is not a draft. This is a work, complete in form, but not in understanding. Radiocarbon dating placed the parchment's creation date at approximately 1400 or the 15th century. But no European language of that period contains elements similar to the manuscript's text. Neither Latin, nor Greek, nor Middle High German, nor Church Slavonic. Cryptographers tried to crack the text. Algorithms, statistics, and frequency analysis methods were used. Some structures did indeed indicate the existence of grammar. There were words that were repeated. There were endings. There were forms corresponding to declensions. But there was no key. The main thing is that the manuscript does not contain a single name, a single date, or mention of a deity, not a single character, not a single historical event, not a single point of connection to the world in which it was created. It is a system without an author. One hypothesis claims the manuscript is a forgery, a skillful counterfeit created in later times. But analysis has shown that the ink matches the era. The writing style is developed, not imitated. And the main thing is that to create a fake so complex, without purpose, meaning, and orientation, and at the same time not to insert a single recognizable element seems like a pointless effort. Supporters of another version believe that the text may be written in a fictitious language, created perhaps for a ritual or as part of an esoteric system. But rituals are usually accompanied by names. Gods, spirits, numbers, images. Here, nothing. Only things. Plants, shapes, shapes, shapes. Some suggest thinking differently. Perhaps the manuscript shouldn't be understood linearly. Perhaps it's a description of a world in which the logic we're accustomed to doesn't exist. A world in which there are no personalities, only phenomena. No time, only cycles. No faith, only consistency. One modern researcher, Professor Gibbs, suggested that the text was written for a different form of perception. Not for reading with the eyes, but for working with the text differently, through hearing, movement, tactility. But it's impossible to prove this. All that exists are pages, and a text that doesn't let you in. The manuscript has been scrutinized. Scans are available. Research continues. But with each passing decade, it becomes clearer. Perhaps there will be no solution. Not because it's impossible, but because we don't know what form the question should take. This is not a story without an end. It is a system that has no beginning. It does not require an explanation. It simply does not refer to anything, as if it was created not to convey, but to exist, quiet, complex, without us. The village that ate its shadow. In central Nepal, on the slopes of the Mahabharat range, there is a region locally called Ruro. This word has no direct translation, but its meaning is close to the concept of the other side of the world, or inner twilight. There are no settlements there, no infrastructure, only paths leading through the forest and stone ledges. But on old topographic maps, starting from the late 19th century, a settlement was marked in this area. It had a name, a shape, a population. There was a school, columns of rice, a temple. It was called Tapirijan. There are references to it in administrative documents from the British colonial period. The 1883 census indicates a population of around 140 people. The 1912 reports show 60. In 1937, 17. And after that, nothing. Not a catastrophe, not an epidemic, not migration, just disappearance. The last entry is a postcard. Letter not delivered, addressee unknown. Date, 1941. Modern satellite images show only forest in the area. No traces of roads, no stone structures, no remains of a field. Even according to satellite data, the soil is untouched, as if the settlement never existed. But there are maps, and they match. In 2010, a group of researchers set out to find at least traces. A foundation, a well, a place of worship. After a week of searching, they came to a clearing where the soil was looser. We dug a test pit and found a ceramic shard at a depth of 1 meter, simple fired clay, standard for the early 20th century. But there was nothing nearby. No coal, no organic matter, no debris, one thing, isolated. One of the expedition members conducting a magnetometric survey noticed an anomaly. Over an area approximately 30 by 30 meters, the instrument showed zero response. No attenuation, no interference, no signal at all. As if nothing was reflecting in that area. No clay, no metal, no density. As if the area of land wasn't responding. The researchers left the area 2 days later. The cause was an unexpected technical malfunction. GPS units shut down. Cameras recorded blank frames, electronic compasses froze. All this, without explanation, temperature, pressure, and humidity were within normal limits. Locals are reluctant to talk about this place. In local mythology, there is the image of a shadow that no longer wants to return. This is not death, not destruction, but a decision not to be observed. Some believe that the isolated villagers gradually moved away. Perhaps they went to other regions. Perhaps they disappeared into neighboring villages. But if so, why does no one remember a single name? Not a single old man from there? Not a single family connected to that place? Others believe that Tapirijan was never a village in the traditional sense, that it was a space of action, not a settlement. Perhaps a ritual zone, a place where a form of isolation, not physical but conceptual, was practiced. Some ethnographers have suggested that the villagers possessed a worldview in which the goal was disappearance. Not escape, but withdrawal from observable reality. The assertion that the village ate its shadow, in this sense, is not a metaphor. It is a statement. The villagers destroyed the connection between themselves and their reflection. This is confirmed by the fact that in old photographs of the region taken by random travelers, the village is always in the shadows, even during the day, even in bright sunlight. The stone buildings are barely discernible. They are dimmer than the rest. It's hard to put into words, but perhaps that's the point. The village hasn't disappeared. It's simply become invisible, as if its matrix has turned inward, as if presence has ceased to be important. Researchers ceased their work in 2014 due to a lack of new discoveries. The disappearance was complete. Today, in the place of Tapirijan, there is only grass, not a single visible trace, not a memorial plaque, not a road, only forest, only silence, and sometimes the wind, which suddenly stops when you walk along the coordinates where, according to the maps, the main street used to be. Some claim that when you stand there, you feel that something was there, not visible, not audible, but on the edge of sensation. This is not just how settlements disappear. This is how forms of memory disappear. Not forgotten, but voluntarily removed from the observable. A shipwreck without a ship, without a sea, without a crew. In 1965, in a desert part of Namibia, on the border of sand dunes and a rocky plateau, geologists discovered a cluster of metallic elements. The region was known as a zone of active uranium and rare earth mining, and the initial assumption was that the object was of man-made origin, the wreckage of old exploration equipment, possibly from the Second World War. But upon closer inspection it became clear the metal was older, significantly so. The object was a patch of ground approximately 40 by 15 meters, partially strewn with oxidized iron and brass fittings. Along the contours were the remains of fasteners, rivets, and rounded sections of corner beams. Visually, it's the outline of a hull, not a building but a ship. The outline followed the shape of a ship, an elongated oval hull tapering toward the stern, and the remains of fragments resembling masts or bulkheads. All the elements were deformed, severely damaged by time and corrosion. But most importantly, they lay in the desert, more than 100 kilometers from the coast. The nearest sea is the Atlantic Ocean. The landscape between the discovery site and the coast is dunes, cliffs, and plains. No rivers, no traces of oxbow lakes, no geological signs that the sea ever reached this level. Geological history shows that the region has been stable for the last 8,000 years. So the main questions were simple. If this is a ship's hull, how did it end up here? If it's not a ship, why does its shape perfectly match naval architectural standards? And if it's not a hull, why does it have a clear outline that corresponds to the entire internal logic of shipbuilding? Some speculated that these were fragments of ground-based equipment accidentally assembled into the familiar shape, but an examination of all the elements revealed the thickness of the metal, the curves, the type of alloy. Everything was consistent with shipbuilding from the late 18th to early 19th centuries. With a preserved number attracted particular attention. Corrosion had almost erased it, but under the right angle of light, the markings were visible. The date, 1847, and the signature, C77. None of the known ship registers, British, Portuguese, or French, contain a corresponding number. There were no bones nearby, no animals, no humans, no clothing, no traces of wood, only metal and sand. It has been hypothesized that the hull was delivered here in pieces, as part of an engineering project, perhaps as a temporary shelter. But then there should have been foundations, fortifications, traces of a foundation. None of this is present. Nothing but metal. No signs, no name, no transportation technology. According to magnetic data, the site exhibits a stable field, slightly elevated relative to the surrounding area. This indicates the presence of parts of the structure hidden under a layer of sand. Perhaps there is still part of the frame underneath. But no government agency has authorized excavations. The reason is the lack of clear historical or strategic value. Today, the site is partially buried. Only lines remain, like an outline on the ground, like the ghost of a ship that no one remembers, not in the maritime registers, not in the archives. This is not a local legend. No one from the region ever spoke of a sea reaching the plateau. Not in oral tradition, not in drawings. This is not a repetition, not a myth, only a form without a source. And in this form lies the whole mystery, because it reproduces the principle of a construction that could not be built here, could not be left here, and could not be forgotten here. The world buried under the symbol. A small research expedition was launched in 2007 on the Chincha Plateau in central Peru, far from well-known routes and tourist trails. A team of archaeologists from Lima digitally archived geoglyphs that had not previously been officially cataloged. Among the expected straight lines, circles, and triangles characteristic of the region, one object was found that immediately raised questions. It wasn't the largest, it wasn't the most complex, but its shape was strikingly different. It was a symbol. One. Without symmetry, without repetition, without decorative load. It looked like the intersection of three angles in different directions. A simple, but geometrically unstable figure. 90 meters long, the surface is a scorched gravel crust, exactly like the Nazca Plateau, but there are no other lines nearby, just one. A satellite image showed that the shape is perfectly aligned with magnetic south, not geographic south. This is unusual. Most ancient buildings and drawings are oriented with the sun, stars, and terrain. Here, the landmark is hidden. Archaeologists conducted a soil analysis. Beneath a layer of gravel, at a depth of just over a meter, a stone covered in a coal deposit was discovered. Cleaning revealed that the same figure, only smaller, was engraved on it. It was as if the geoglyph had been scaled down from the original. What was interesting was not the symbol itself, but what was underneath it. And a rectangular stone surface was discovered, about 5 by 8 meters. The surface was polished. The corners were preserved. The central part was a barely noticeable depression. At first, it was mistaken for the base of an altar. But further down, beneath the layers, a structure descending downwards was revealed. Stone steps framed by rubble, a rectangular passage. The descent is steep, about 10 meters. The walls are hand-laid. Below is a hall, low, stone, vaulted, without decoration, without niches. In the center is an empty pedestal. Around, nothing. No inscriptions, no objects, no ceramics, no bones, only walls and silence. The whole was shaped like a crypt, but without a burial, not a tomb, not a temple, just a space located directly under the symbol. The scan revealed that this hole isn't the only one. There are several more chambers underground. Some are connected, others are isolated. The geometry of their arrangement replicates the structure of the symbol above, not in a straight line, but in layers, as if the symbol weren't a sign, but a spatial distribution diagram. On one of the lower levels, the walls were covered with a thin indentation, reminiscent of a cipher. Not writing, not a language, but rhythm, repetitions, and pauses. Not lines, but pulses, as if the indentation conveyed not a text, but a tempo. Not a single symbol was read. There are no analogs. Not in Peru, not in Mesoamerica, not in the Andes. The locals called this place Piedra Quebrada, the stone that cannot be explained. They didn't worship it. They didn't use it. They just walked around it. Not because they were afraid, but because, as they said, everything has already happened there. The question of why they built an underground structure without access, without functions, without traces of ritual, remains open. But even more importantly, why was all this buried beneath a symbol visible only from the air? One hypothesis is that the symbol wasn't artificial. Perhaps it was a marker created by geological processes. But then why is it duplicated on the stone beneath it? Another theory is that the symbol was a marker, an address, not necessarily for a person, and then the question arises, if it is an address, then for whom? And if it is a diagram, then for what? Archaeologists are inclined to believe that what we have before us is a model, a storage system, perhaps memory, perhaps knowledge, but in a form to which we have no key, and perhaps it shouldn't exist. The chambers themselves are not meant to be inhabited. They have no ventilation. They are too small for ritual, but they are built, and they were not built by the wind, not by the elements, by a human hand, with precision, with design, with effort. Whatever it is not intended for participation, only for recording, and perhaps this is its main meaning, not to explain, but to be. In the last few hours, we've been through 25 stories. None of them provided a definitive answer. That was the idea, not to tell what happened, but to show where we stop, where knowledge stops working, and what for now remains, only presence begins. Each of these mysteries had a form, stone, sound, geometric, but the meaning is not recorded. It is either lost or never existed in the form we are accustomed to. Not all riddles have a solution. Some are constructed not to be understood, but to be. History is most often associated with linearity, civilizations replacing one another, architectures passing from era to era. But beyond this logic, there remain points where development did not occur, where something appeared and disappeared, where someone knew too little to explain and too much to leave. We don't always understand what we've found, and that doesn't make the find any less real. Everything we've seen is not fiction. These are materials recorded by instruments, maps, coordinates, and observations, facts for which we don't yet have a language. Perhaps the meaning of these stories lies not in the objects themselves, but in how we relate to them. When knowledge refuses to be read, we learn to pay attention, not to the solution, but to the very existence of the trace. It is not necessary to understand. Sometimes it is enough to record. It was, and it still remains. The world doesn't need to be explained. Its non-necessity is part of its reality. We don't lose control when we don't know something. We're simply back at that point where we can watch and say nothing. Perhaps these riddles are not a call or a test, simply a reminder that beneath the layer, beyond the line, underground, there was also, and perhaps there still is,